This royal bull. You my father and you my mother.
God's sake, lower your voice.
Do you know what it is to be in love, either of you? I love Harry Percy and will marry him.
Anne.
Hello everyone. So today I've asked my mum to join us. My mother will pop in later on. So today I'm going to be talking about a few films, but basically I'm going to be talking about the Tudors and the Stuarts. So we're going back in time because there was a time when films about the English royal family were very popular and often got Oscar nominations and Oscar wins. So I'd like to talk about, films from a few different eras, but Anne of a Thousand Days and the two films about Queen Elizabeth that Betty Davis made, The Virgin Queen and Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex. And then perhaps we might talk a little bit about the Stuarts in The Lion in Winter. So I got a message from one of the comments from the subscribers to say like, hey, have you ever thought about doing a what if Anne and Catherine had, kept their necks attached to their bodies? Now, as I'm not a historian, I'm just a movie buff. That's why I've asked my mother to join us, because she's a history buff. She's she went to Australia's top university, Melbourne University, to study science. She's studied religion, and she's studied history and philosophy of science. So just someone who's a lot smarter than I am and who knows an awful lot more than I do. But I'm going to start with the movies. So let's start chronologically, but not in terms of the way the films were made, but in terms of the people they're based on.
Brother, I must fight, I must.
You know what it means when a king asks for you.
If I don't, I can ask my pregnant and foolish sister.
If you turn him away, we can say farewell to all we've worked for and all we have.
And if our parents had not taken an advantage when it came their way, what would have become of us?
If we lose the king's favour, we lose everything.
Then say goodbye to it all.
Okay, so Anne of a Thousand Days. It is a little bit like, let's do a quick review. So it basically follows Anne's ascension to the Queen and her 1,000 days as Queen before she gets her head chopped off. And, but then the consequences of her life has ramifications, well, especially in the Commonwealth, for all of us. Now, okay, and maybe a little bit pertinent as, there's a unpopular queen at the moment, although people keep telling us that she's popular. Who likes Queen Camilla? All right, maybe Queen Camilla's going to watch this. Hi, Queen Camilla. You're not my favourite, I'm sorry. But I don't believe that, obviously this is a little bit like Anne. In some ways, Camilla's life was a bit out of her control. She had this future king who was in love with her, and in some ways it is this beautiful love story, much more beautiful than Anne. Poor Anne, her sister was a mistress of Henry VIII, because basically Henry VIII, he was trying to get a son to be the heir, and he was basically sleeping with every woman in England who was of childbearing years, and eventually it became Anne's turn, and and the thing is, even though Henry VIII was a jerk, and he was a jerk, he had absolute power And so, Anne really didn't have any say in the matter. Like, even though she was in love and engaged with this fellow, he managed to get them separated, much like, Jennifer Jones was later with Selznick. But anyway, that's a video for another day. The film itself is a little bit dry. It's the sort of film that your English teacher would probably like and then force you to watch for entertainment. And, you get a lot of information about it and about the time. Richard Burton, who plays Henry, he's brilliant. Elizabeth Taylor, there's a brief cameo. She's behind a mask because she was basically there to be like, keep your hands off Guinevere Barjot, who plays Anne. Now, I love Guinevere. She's perfect in this small but important role in one of my favourite films called Eye of the Beholder. And she got her start with this role. She's brilliant. There is a slight 60s bent to it. She's a French girl living in England, and she's got a very 60s vibe to her. I don't know how true that is to the original character, but even though she's forced into a relationship with a man she doesn't love, she eventually does figure out, unlike her sister, how to game the system, and eventually she gets him to marry her and promises him many sons, but anyway, delivers him one of the greatest future queens with Queen Elizabeth. And the film ends with a shot of a young Queen Elizabeth. And, of course, she grows up, and we see the way she grows up. When she refused to do Gone with the Wind, I feel like because she didn't want to work with so ironically she didn't want to work with Errol Flynn, but she worked with him anyway. She apparently hated working with him. It wasn't until Olivia de Havilland forced her to rewatch the film, and she finally begrudgingly admitted when she was older that Errol Flynn did a marvellous job as Essex. So they did something smart. So in her 50s, Elizabeth fell in love. Well, she had a favourite with Lord Essex, and he was only 19. The interesting thing about this film is that there's obviously a reason why we call him a favourite rather than call him like a lover or something like that, because he doesn't have any power in this. He doesn't have any leverage in this relationship. Like he's at her beck and call, and he is ambitious to be king. So what we see later in, say, The Lion in Winter, where this is not a spoiler because it's right at the beginning. So Charles II, he's got a French queen, and they're fighting with each other for dominance, and literally, she got together a battle of soldiers to fight his soldiers to do a coup. This all happens before the start of the film, so she's now locked away in a prison castle, only allowed to return at Christmas time once a year to play Happy Families. I think it's pretty clear that what would have happened had Elizabeth married her favourite. She was in a bind too. Had she married him, so he would have become sovereign king. Because the weird thing, now you might know a little bit, because Camilla is called Queen Consort, and it is a type of queen, and it basically means that it is someone who has become a queen through marriage. So they've got the Queen Regent, who is obviously becomes queen through birth, like Elizabeth and Mary and Elizabeth II and Victoria. And then you've got a queen consort, someone who marries into it. And then, of course, you've got the queen mother, so the mother of the king. So there's three ways to be a queen, but there's no other way of being a king than being a king. So if you're king, you are the regent. They eventually sorted it out with Victoria because she was able to get married, and the husband was named Philip. Sorry, not Philip. That's Elizabeth's husband. Her husband was Victoria and Albert was prince, so it wasn't king. And so that's how they solved that, because queen regent and king regent. King regent is above. Now, I don't make the rules, it's very sexist, but this is the way it works. But anyway, they've worked something out. Now, interestingly enough, in Japan, they're having to work out that very, very thing, because the current emperor has no male heirs. Oh no! So, anyway, it's something they're going to have to figure out. What are they going to do? So the interesting thing, they make it a bit of a hallmarky kind of. It's a romance, but and it is interesting to see Vincent Price in there, and I keep forgetting his name, but the actor who was the mother. The actor who was the father of Elizabeth Taylor in a couple of in National Velvet. So he has a role in this film. And obviously Olivia de Havilland is another kind of like one of the Queen's ladies in waiting, and she's in love with Essex, and they want to be together. So there is a little bit of like, oh, this kind of love triangle, and as much as she loves him, she understands the dynamic, Queen Elizabeth. So she's very smart, so she essentially has to chop the head off of her favourite. Sorry, that's a bit of a spoiler, but it's a pretty hard life. Like you like everybody says like, oh, I want to be famous, I want to be a celebrity, but once you're famous, if you're single, how can you ever trust that some the people who are going to want to be with you are going to be these ambitious types, like the kind of the really good people that you would want to be with. They don't want to be with you because they don't want to deal with the fame stuff. And sometimes it works, but anyway, so tears of the regent. Okay, so now I'd like to talk to my mum. So the question was, what if Queen Elizabeth, what if Anne and Catherine had kept her head? So my question to my mother was, would we all be Catholic? So the first movie I was talking about was Anne of 1,000 Days, which is of course about Anne Boleyn. And the question is, well, what if what if Anne had not maybe what if Anne had kept her head on her shoulders?
Yes, but you're saying, had Henry cut off from the Catholic Church, made himself the head of the Church of England? To marry her, he made himself the head of the Church of England.
That's right. He made himself the Church of England. But I'm sort of wondering, like, how would Anne be able to keep her head attached to her shoulders? Would it be him not
The problem
marrying
is,
her in the first place?
Yes, that would. So, but the problem is, I think once he severed himself off from Rome and made himself the head of the Church of England and married, say, Anne, all the other power people round started playing political games,
Right.
just as they are now. But unfortunately, in those days, you'd lose your head if you ended up on the wrong side of things. So
Yeah, they were playing very, very serious games.
yes, but they were using other people as pawns, but they got caught themselves, a lot of them. So I thought you were going to ask about Henry and Protestantism.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's sort of my thing, is that if he stayed married to the first Catherine, my
Catherine,
goodness, there's so many Catherines.
yeah.
There's so many Annes and there's so many Marys. It's really, I've sort of found out that I've really not known that Mary, Queen of Scots, was not the Mary who set all the Protestants on fire.
Well, Henry VIII's problem was he didn't get a male heir.
That's right. And
That's
so
what
that
he
was,
wanted.
yeah,
And he wanted to keep the Tudor family ongoing. So that's what he was aiming at. He
and
also
he did have 3 sons.
he did have the ones that died.
There's the son that died.
Little, and the Henry Fitzroy, he was an illegitimate son. He was killed in some battle. He was the son that he, I suppose, really wanted, but he wasn't, legitimate. So,
and Anne of 1,000 Days suggests that the second child was a male but was stillborn.
well, I suppose there's a lot of children died. A lot of children did die. So, yes,
and this was still the time where they thought that
clips of history. But I was felt that, perhaps thinking about it, that Henry used the fact that England was becoming Protestant. It was for his own advantages, and he cut himself off from Rome so he could remarry. When he asked for Pope to dissolve the marriage to Catherine, that work. So then he decided to become head. But I was looking back, and if you think the century before, England had reduced Wycliffe, who was a priest who translated the Bible, who challenged everything and said that, the church is too wealthy, it's too, it was going off. That's in the 1300s. That's at the same time that Dante over in Italy went down to Rome and was horrified at all the money being given to the church and didn't like Pope Boniface.
And then they all got excommunicated in Florence, didn't they?
Well, I can't quite win that Florence, but the fact that Dante wrote his poem, and he put Pope in the depths of hell, the fact that's in the Wycliffe, that people were starting to move away from the church anyway.
That's right.
So the century later,
this is also Luther as well, isn't it? Around the same time.
Luther was at the same time as Henry. Was at the same time. So he's in the 1400s, but I'm just saying in the 1300s, people were starting to query, especially as the church was wanting the indulgences and people were challenging. Now, the printing press does come along in 1440, so that enables ideas to be spread. But I would say that England was on its way to being Protestant anyway. You can't just suddenly, he can't just make himself head of the church and say everything to change. It was ready to change.
That's right. So the question of would we all be Catholic is sort of a moot point, because it was sort of happening.
I think it was
anyway.
It was changing. And then if you think by the following century, to Henry. Well, if Henry didn't get that male heir, he had Mary, who was Catholic, and then it would have been Mary, Queen of Scots. It would go to the Stuart family.
Right.
Then, well, she would have been for a while, but her son had been brought up Protestant, James. So Scotland had already moved to being Protestant, and James. So that was Henry's. So, and then James's son, Charles the First. By that stage, that's moving into the next 1600s. England's already saying we haven't reformed enough. And when Charles still believed it was the divine right of kings, and they were trying to explain to Charles that they didn't go, no. So he actually ended up losing his head, and England became a republic there.
That's
so
right.
England
This is the Charles III. He may be the first one who doesn't lose his head.
Well, Charles II, he was the one that went on. They brought him back. He was the one, and they all got happy again with Christmas and such. But it's in a time. But
then the Stuarts come again after with.
But
we have King Willie.
If Anne Boleyn wasn't made queen, Elizabeth,
and she was a mistress. Yeah, Elizabeth becomes illegitimate.
Elizabeth would have been just one of his illegitimate children. And there's the question: would the Elizabethan age have occurred without Elizabeth on the throne? So there's lots of ifs in history. And again, like I'm saying, I think England was already moving to be Protestant without Henry. And would all of those great, it was an era of all that literary, Shakespeare and such.
That's right. Apparently, because a lot of this was also with how slow letter writing was, because apparently England had agreed to finance Columbus searching the New World, but I think he went to when they were a bit slow responding, and so he went to Spain.
Yeah, but so
there's a lot of what ifs with Elizabeth. If she's illegitimate, would.
Well, I'm just wondering who would have been on the throne if she wasn't there. They would have moved to Mary.
Two Marys, right? There's the.
Well, if Elizabeth was, Mary, her half sister, but when she died, would have to go because she didn't have the children.
Right.
So it'd have to go to Mary, Queen of Scots then, and then she may not have lived that long. She was Catholic, but her son James was Protestant. So, the Stuarts are Protestants. So
if she was illegitimate, would she have been made like a baroness or something?
I think they were always giving titles. She would have been married off to some duke or something.
And maybe she would have had a bit of a happier life because, she was always swatting off, people
she was
trying to assassinate her, and she always, and then, obviously she couldn't get married because, the Betty Davis movie,
she was
of Elizabeth and Essex, where essentially she can have favourites, but as soon as she marries someone, they then become.
Yeah, that's a bit of a. And she was a brilliant woman too.
So, and this is the point where England is controlling France.
No, you'd have to ask. No, there is part of France that they were always going back and forward. And, sorry, I'm not sure. There's that part of France which was under English rule for some time. I'd have to go and look that that up.
But
But they're always, England and France were always, meeting and
because I think the first Queen Mary was married to a Frenchman,
yes.
but then they're
Yes.
always trying to marry the queens off to Spaniards. I noticed that.
Well,
I thought it was interesting.
Yes.
This is where I might have been more interested in history at school if they'd told the gossip rather than the dates of the battles,
Right.
because the fact that they were trying to marry Elizabeth off to the King of Spain, then later on she defeats him in battle with the Armada. Like, that's
Yeah.
quite interesting, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's always been so that, like Julius Caesar marrying, oh, boy, sorry, I was trying to think of his name, the other guy who's up again. They're always marrying
Octavius.
people's, no, that
Yeah.
was his son, sorry, Maximilian.
Maximilian.
They're always marrying their daughters or sisters, and that's always
Because it's
been
always political, isn't it?
Yeah,
Not
unfortunately.
a love match, but
Yeah, occasionally they did turn out that way.
so Spain must have been very powerful because that's where I think they were with Queen Christina of Sweden. They were trying to marry her off to the King of Spain at
Yeah, I
one
suppose they
point.
were always using people as pawns
Mm,
in it. It wasn't, life wasn't
yeah, and
that.
that's maybe where it's worth. I forget if I think I in the video I recorded. I think I mentioned the difference between Queen Regent and Queen
Sorry, beg your
Consort.
pardon?
I think in the video I recorded, I think I mentioned the difference between Queen Regent, Queen Consort, and Queen Mother.
Oh, that's what yes, whether the one who's reigning or the one who's just the
Mm.
wife. Yes.
Because, I mean, obviously they had to figure it out because,
Well,
you know,
they did later bring over the William and Anne and made them
they
um,
are
reigning
co-leaders.
together. That's when the Stuarts sort of ran out. These families seem to run out of people.
Yeah. Although the Stuarts will probably make a comeback if the monarchy keeps going after King Charles III with
Well,
with
because
William, because
yes,
Diana's a Stuart.
well, Charles II had a lot of illegitimate children, so a lot of the aristocracy of England would be descended from them.
Which is what The Lion in Winter is all about. That Charles II had a lot of illegitimate children. So, so a lot of these movies about Queen Elizabeth they're always trying to marry her off to these favourites. So
Yes, well, I suppose that both
like
Henry and Elizabeth lived lives that were, gave a lot of material for
the films,
films, didn't
they did. They did.
And Elizabeth
She
was
is her
living,
father's daughter a bit.
well, she lived at the time of Shakespeare, so he wasn't writing about her, but he was writing for her.
That's right.
And
Yes.
yeah, so
do you think we would have had Shakespeare under Mary
well,
of Scott?
he would have been still about, but I'm just saying,
Would it have been a lot more Catholic?
Elizabeth, I think that why it flourished was she kept peace. She wasn't rearing up to go into battle all the time, so there was a time of peace. So theatre and writing and the arts could flourish.
So
But
they may
was
not
it?
have had that otherwise.
Well, I don't
Which is
know.
funny because she's known for her battles, but as you say, she's essentially a woman of peace.
No, she was known really the fact that she kept it peaceful. But probably, if you think about it, the printing press had been like 100 years before. You were able to print things out And, it is a time, the King James Bible is a time
So that
things in
comes through
English.
Mary's Queen of Scots son, King James. Is that the
Well,
one, or is that before?
that's the name of the one who's got it.
Mm.
But I think it was actually Edward, the brother, the one that didn't last very long, who was the half brother of Elizabeth, who probably started in that time, and it was probably being translated in that time, but it would have, been printed, because the fact that they did the whole lot of it, apparently was a team of people doing it.
So which they say about Shakespeare too, but I mean that's where you could say some of the greatest examples of English literature with Shakespeare and the King James Bible.
Yes, there are others.
Would we have had them?
Yeah, it may have been. Look, you'd have to ask people. It may have been at the time of English, the way English was spoken at that time, too. It may have led to. There's some really good passages in the King James Bible. Lazarus. If they want to go in there, he's been in the. In the tomb, what is it, 3 days and he now stinketh? There's some wonderful passages in.
Yeah, there are some very good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it may have been just the age and the education, and
the fact that you've got a printing press, the fact that people can ideas move round a lot quicker.
Well, that is the idea. Is if it's is the golden age bottom up, or is it top down? So they say with companies that the fish rots from the head down. Meaning that if a company's going bad, it's all coming from the leader. So perhaps Elizabeth I had.
She was very clever. She was. I mean, I think she just Muse herself would be translating things from Latin to Greek to English. She used to just do that as a
bit of fun.
Muse herself. So the Muse.
Yeah, which.
So I think my answer to would it still be Catholic? The answer is no. I'd say unless. Like France, when they.
But maybe we wouldn't be the Church of England. We could be, say, like
Church of Scotland.
Church of Scotland, or the Lutherans, or something.
Yeah, but they were just belonging to their country, isn't it? It's
so that was sort of coming anyway. Can I quickly talk? Like, I know you say it doesn't really matter because once. One wife is much like the next.
Oh yes, once one wife, yeah.
But I think it'd be interesting to maybe compare and contrast.
I don't know about all these poor wives.
Yeah, well, at least Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, which apparently you said Howard is connected to our somewhat divisive Prime Minister.
Yes.
John Howard, who said that he said once when his future wife turned him down, he just kept persisting and persisting, which is what he did to become Prime Minister. So,
yes. So maybe the Howards are
very persistent. Yes. And you said that.
Oh well, Jane was the one that Henry seemed to really like. Jane was the mother.
Jane Seymour.
Oh boy, but I think she was. Yes, she was influential, I think, in the ideas with Protestant. Yeah, but
they didn't last very long. No, they didn't last very long. But so what? This documentary I just watched this morning was suggesting that Anne Boleyn had a heretical book that she gave King Henry, which
Well,
was
she probably,
essentially saying, like, this book was saying that, you know, that it shouldn't, that the divine, that, you know, the power of the church shouldn't rely on the Pope, it should be with the king. And that was sort
yes,
of
yes,
what
well,
he liked that idea, and that's when, as he said, all
yes,
those
yes,
wealthy monasteries were ransacked.
yes, that's a little bit sad, all those monasteries, you know, when you see it now.
They're all just
But then
skeletons.
apparently Wycliffe was, again, the church being so wealthy. And of course, that's what Dante was horrified at, the wealth of the church too. So
Mm. Yes.
I suppose
Um,
it's what they do with the wealth too,
well,
because we've found out there's always the people at the top seem to feel that they need things more than others.
that's right. And well, how much power does this leader have? Is it like, you know, yes, minister or yes, prime minister, where there's the, you know, Machiavellian assistant who is really.
Right. Well, they all were like that too. They had all these people who were advising round them, like Henry VIII and such, and then you could push him so far, and then
But
you'd
then you might
lose
lose
your
your head.
yeah, yeah.
So getting back to
Um,
Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, they do seem quite young. Like,
I think Catherine Anne Boleyn was educated because she'd been sent over to the French court, so
that's
she
right.
was that. Whereas I think Catherine Howard was just unfortunately a pawn with her uncles. I think she was
That's
brought
right. And
herself.
then, because it was very
The other
sad, because
ones,
he could have just annulled the marriage, but he ended up, you know,
yeah.
chopping her
Problem
head
is,
off because of
yeah, that's
it was. But then
yeah.
it's the
Anne
same
of
with
Cleves,
Anne, because it was the. He said, yeah, they all mix up, aren't they? But yeah, what's about Anne of
yeah.
Cleves?
Anne of Cleves was the one. When he saw her, she came over. She didn't look like the painting, but
Mm,
she was the one who managed to keep her head, and they managed to sort of edge that,
yeah,
you know, out, and she lived somewhere else that must have annulled that marriage and such.
she survived.
She survived,
Yes, but the
and
other ones ended up with. He got out of it through either actual or perceived.
Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr was the last one. Well,
Mm,
she outlived him, but I think she was getting a bit old, and
yeah,
that by that time, yeah,
I mean, it's all pretty, you know, because as you say, he just wanted that male heir. Because
that's what he did want. So
I
if he'd
mean,
got it, maybe he would have been content, or he may or may not. But these
but
people in
then
the
I mean,
background,
he might have still had all the mistresses, just
oh yeah, he would have had all the mistresses. Yes,
because
that's
that's the awful thing I've really thought about with Anne of a Thousand Days, was just that she had no choice. You know, so he was interested in her, so say la vie. You know, I mean, but
she
she
must have
sort
been
of had the sister who'd been a mistress of Henry, so she sort of knew, you know,
yeah.
maybe you have to.
Because they've got people pushing them, like the parents, and the parents had moved up, the Boleyns had moved up in the
That's right.
world. It's
Oh, it's pretty
and she
sick.
must have been fairly highly intelligent, Anne Boleyn, because the fact that how intelligent Elizabeth
Elizabeth
was.
was, of course, of course. Um,
But I suppose it was a time when you see it's a time of change anyway,
mm.
isn't it? They're going through
Oh, I mean, I
time of
think that's why they keep making films about it, because it's just very, very interesting.
yes, they are always making films about it, aren't they? I think they're quite intrigued with him and his six wives, and
Mm.
I mean, they oversimplify it that, you know, that he made himself the head of the Church of England, but you know, I suppose you know, yeah.
Well, because the
But
Magna Carta does predate Henry VIII, but I think
yes,
that's
yes,
where, the power is shifting, and then I think
Yes.
him wanting this heir was a bargaining chip that they were able to expand on the Magna Carta and get
I suppose
more
people
power to the
they
government, I
just,
should say.
well, people imagine they, I'm from such and such a family and we're going to go on, and
That's right.
all want their dynasty.
Mm.
But unfortunately,
Well, then, because that's the problem with all they're pure. They try to be pure, and then they end up so inbred that
intermarry.
they end up
Yeah.
not.
Well,
Because
it's bad.
that's where
Yeah.
all of Henry's kids were very, they were quite
Well,
sickly.
they were very, we don't really know what the problem was that Anne had. I don't know. Not Anne, Catherine of Aragon, the fact that
Mm,
she only had that one child,
mm.
but that survived, but a lot
But
of children didn't survive.
well, I mean that because Elizabeth was painting her face with lead and then cleaning it with
Yeah,
mercury. I mean that's
yeah, yeah.
which would have made
Would have
maybe some of her
been.
decisions with Essex, who was only 19. Anyway, there's just so much to talk about, which I guess that's why.
That's why, and maybe it's recorded too.
And it is
The
recorded. Oh,
time
there would
it's been
be.
recorded, people have recorded it, and as I say, it is at the time of the printing press. Maybe it was peaceful enough for them to record all of this
That's
goings
right.
on. So,
So there might be even more interesting stories that just didn't get written down.
yes, I suppose so. Yes,
But
yeah.
yeah.
But,
Anyway, but I suppose to conclude,
so,
it must be awful to be a royal, especially in
oh,
those
it would have
days.
been. Yes,
Like, I mean, it's just
yes. Well, so
just
of
with
course, it's changing. The thing that was changing, Parliament was, starting to develop.
mm, that's right.
And
So,
so you gradually get the Parliament becoming more powerful.
so
Time
yeah,
goes on. So,
Boleynism and the Westminster system. The
yes,
Westminster system, I guess, was the
develop.
steam train had
Yes, yes, started to
started
roll.
rolling,
Yes,
and
yes,
so in
yes.
some ways
They were at a point when the
it was
train
changing
was,
anyway.
yes. Oh no, things were changing.
Mm,
Yes.
and
And knowledge too. I mean, you've got to think of the scientific knowledge too. It
mm,
was starting to develop with all the,
that's right.
so things are changing
They are
until
changing.
they start challenging, funny ideas like, on the divine right of kings and
Mm.
silly things like that. About
Well, I
what,
guess if they could challenge the Pope's, right of rule, and eventually
oh,
someone is going
yeah,
to start thinking, well, why,
that's
why,
why the kings, yeah,
why
yeah.
does the king have the divine right of rule?
Well, of course, the papacy became very political. They were
Mm,
running an empire.
well,
So
perhaps it's still like that. I mean, you got to see the change of Pope,
I
luckily,
did see the change of Pope. Yeah,
with the
yeah,
fellow who liked his cat.
yes.
I
So
don't see why he couldn't have had his cat in the Vatican, but
I don't know. Maybe you can't have a cat in the Vatican because it is a museum.
might scratch all the paintings.
Yeah, well, yes, you are in fact living in a museum.
Mm, that's true. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's very interesting. Thank you, Mum, for doing
What you
this.
hoping?
So
Yeah,
I'll stop the recording.
yeah. Thank you.
My mum just emailed me with some more information. So she writes, I have just found the suggestion that Henry VIII had Kell's syndrome, which causes blood group antigenicity, and McLeod syndrome, which causes psychotic changes later in life. These are linked and inherited on the X chromosome. This is why his sons died, except Edward, who died young, and why Henry went a little bit psychotic later in life. Now, to further explain, if the wife had a daughter first, such as with Catherine and Anne, the wife would develop antibodies to fetal blood from the X chromosome from Henry. That is why the subsequent children died from hemolytic disease of the newborn. Jane had a son first, so she did not develop the antibodies. So there you go. What did you think of that discussion with my mum? She's a very smart lady, and I wish I was half as smart as she was. What do you think? What do you think would have happened to England? Is it inevitable that we all became Protestant? Or would there have been a bigger fight between the Catholics and the Protestants? I don't know. Would we have become Lutheran? So because this touches on religion, I would like everyone to please be respectful in the comments. And if you're not, I will delete it. Because I want to keep this respectful. There's, as much as I would love, a bigger YouTube channel and, obviously to qualify for monetization, I would rather build a nice community because I really enjoy talking to you when everyone comments. Like that's why I do this, because there's not that many people in my life that I can talk to about this stuff. So I'd love to talk to, that's why I respond to every comment. So make a comment, I'm going to respond. I want to build a community, but let's keep it, but let's try and keep it respectful. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to enjoy more of my videos, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you.